Well, we are actually on air. So those of you that are home, welcome back. We had a great day yesterday, and you can get that recording from Joy. But we have a beautiful day here in South Carolina, a gorgeous liturgy this morning, very simple, beautiful. We had members of our group in the choir that sang, and the monks were at their peak. So we're really all set up for our last section here. And this is the last packet. There were 4 packets. This is the last packet on the Catholic imagination and saints and the issue of how do we engage the two sides of reality. As a spiritual director, I just want to start off with the fact that, the image sometimes that we have in training spiritual directors is that, the director needs to know a lot of scripture to make reference to scripture for their prayer. Okay, now that's true. But I think I come from the school of the Catholic imagination, in which, as a spiritual director, I choose short stories, novels, mythology, movies, science fiction, because I notice that directees have a too small image of their life, or they have a lack of imagination of how God can work, or they pigeonhole what is spiritual or what is God, or they even pigeonhole what a holy person looks like. And I've seen holy people, really holy people, that don't look like holy people at all. They're battered, weary, maybe dirty even on their last nerve, but are truly holy. Or their image of God, and I call this the image of God, in which it's your Aunt Matilda, this is God who's easily scandaled by everything and anything. If you say a 4-letter word, God is scandalized. So for instance, and I'll give you some examples and case studies here. Let's say one who does not feel, like they're holy, and they are. Remember I gave you that example yesterday of the man who had the 2-year anniversary about his wife's death, and she was one of the saints in the altar. We don't think of all saints, and you don't have to be canonized to be a saint. So when a person feels like it doesn't look holy, it doesn't feel holy, I have them read some of Flannery O'Connor's stuff, their short stories. And I love the image in which the wife, who's really kind of a torturous woman in the story, who's not a very nice person, Mrs. Tolkien, has a image of God, a mystical image, as she's feeding the pigs. And in the slop, all of a sudden she looks up and she has this glorious story of seeing the Holy Spirit, and she's, overwhelmed with God's presence. Catholic imagination means thinking outside the box of how God is manifested in the world. I have a directee. I would say in her life story, we would say she's had a checkered past. There's been a lot of living, and a lot of ways in which she sees herself as not appropriate for God, like she's tainted, and I'll give her, readings of saints who have had, all kinds of lives that, saw God and changed their life. And the checkered past was actually part of the story. It's just part of the story. Some of the most powerful retreats I've ever given or in California, to women who are in a program, a 2-year program, coming out of prison, and giving them a retreat. And there was one woman there, an African-American woman, who had been on the streets of Oakland for 17 years as a prostitute and a drug addict. Now, I cannot imagine what she saw, did, experienced. I mean, unimaginable. I never saw anyone cry, not out of sadness, cry in her experience of God's love as this woman. During the retreat, I experienced how she experienced God's love, notwithstanding all that she had experienced. Almost to the paradox, because she experienced that, God's love was even greater. And I can still see her in my mind's eye that was now interesting. I've been in convents and monasteries where I've given retreats, and there was not a tear shed. And there might have been a little resistance about, conversion. This woman knew conversion because she knew life at its most desperate. So those who look holy doesn't necessarily mean that they are holy. I had a directee who had a bit of the Puritan in them, like it was very staid, and when they spoke of the love of God, it felt like they were reading a thesis to me, a very boring thesis. And, somehow it wasn't touching the fact that, it may be the love, but it sounded a little too, what would I say, rigid. Well, I had her read this little book of Rumi's poetry. And I said, I want you to put yourself in the person who's writing this. Can you identify with any of the feelings that Rumi was expressing about the love of the other here meaning his friend, as well as that of God? Or can you read John of the Cross about what it really means to allow yourself to be loved? Or the woman who was, proud of her so Catholic family. I had her read Brideshead Revisited and say, every Catholic family has a shadow piece. And, let's look at what reality really looks like. So the Catholic imagination means you balance off what's missing in a person's spiritual life. And the Catholic imagination is the transformation or the capacity to see in anyone's life the purpose or meaning of that life. It has vibrant energy, and it moves towards the mystery. This union of opposites is really what comes that, Catholics deal with these paradoxes all the time and have accepted them as part of reality. The Virgin Mother, the human God, the paradoxes that make no sense to the mind, but have some kind of meaning, fully human and fully divine. So the heart of the Catholic imagination is that in a story, you can have the angelic, the demonic, God, earthbound, sin, fidelity, and infidelity. It all makes for a story. And in the end, somehow the mystery wins. What I love about Graham Greene and his work as a Catholic writer is his book on the end of the affair. And the book starts with a reading from an entry in a journal in which the man who's writing in the journal expresses his intense hatred. And you don't find out till later on in the book that this intense hatred is for God. He hates God with a passion and hates the day that he found out that God was real. Made it even more hateful. And if you read the book, it's all about the love of God. Because until you really hate somebody, you may not really know how to love them. You know, the most intense relationships of love also bring out the darkest emotions. Can we bring all of our emotions to our experience of God? That's what the Catholic imagination says. Yes, you can. It tries to transcend the dualisms and to hold flesh and heaven together. Another writer, a Greek writer, Nikos Kazantzakis, in the Greek Passion, or some of his books are filled with these paradoxes that flesh and heaven and spirit all kind of work itself together. It's the paradox that the human experience, even in its most base, is an adventure towards the divine experience. That what we search for in the body is ultimately found in the spirit. But one doesn't discover the spirit until one has discovered it in the flesh. That's the paradox. On this Saturday, during the ritual, one of the most significant moments is the lighting of the Easter candle. And this is sung as the Exultet. And the entire Exultet is based upon the paradox of the blessed fault that caused such a redemption as this. That without a fall, there wouldn't be a redemption. And without a fall, there wouldn't be Christ. So it's this paradoxical place that the significance of the fault to the whole story. The wound in ourselves that will never be healed is the doorway to darkness, but also the only doorway to God. But it is there that we find a need for God, not in theory, but in practice. So people, let's say, for instance, before they went into recovery from an addiction, they knew of God theoretically. When you're in recovery, in step 3, and you're surrendering to God, that has to be a living, breathing reality in one's life that one can lean into and literally surrender. So the well-formed imagination demands to look at the mystery through the eyes, ears, hearts, and mind. And because in the Catholic tradition, you have a lot of sacramentals and sacrament, it's the external sign, the Eucharist, the rituals, the incense, like today, the music, it all weaves together theology, culture, tradition, artistry, interpretation. In any of the great museums of the Western world, religious art is at the heart of most of those museums. How many Annunciations are there at the Louvre? Right? How many Madonnas? In Italy, how many Francises and mosaics? What happens is, in the Catholic imagination, the imagination goes towards art, towards music, towards architecture, right? I mean, if one of the things about religious buildings, and is particularly in Europe, like the great cathedrals and rebuilding Notre Dame, is that one day I was in Paris with 2 friends, and we went to one of the great cathedrals on Pentecost. And, it was like you had the choirs, you had the music, you had the people, you had, the artistry of the sun coming in with all the mosaics of the life of Christ in the art. I mean, it was like a sensate experience. And part of that is the cult of the saints, or the cult of this imagination, is to bring the inner world into outer expression. It's where we manifest our faith in the concrete. And the gift, I think, in the Catholic tradition is that it shapeshifts itself in the culture that it's in. So, Guadalupe in Mexico is part and parcel of the culture, the history, the religiosity of people. Okay, it's a place of pilgrimage, but it's more than a place of pilgrimage. It's a place of identity and pride that the Mother of God would look like an indigenous person and be dressed in an indigenous clothes, to manifest herself to the people. So, the Catholic imagination at its best is inclusive and tries to bring in all of these non-minimalistic views of religion that, and I think we have a professional pilgrimage leader here who has done all of these, and the thing is, what is a pilgrimage? When you go to a holy site, the difference between a tourist and a pilgrim. Okay, and they're all mixed in. Okay, the tourists are taking pictures of everything, including the shopkeeper, and trying to get, they're buying trinkets and to bring home to everybody. Cappuccino in the square. They don't go in the church. They go to the cappuccino in the square, and and the ice cream, which is in the square also, and they're there 3 hours on the bus. Okay, they had their 3 hours. They rampage through the town, buying things, and they get back in the bus and they're off to the next place. The pilgrim takes it slowly. The pilgrim imbibes the feeling. I told you that for my Golden Jubilee, I spent 10 days in Assisi, and to imbibe that place, day after day, is what the pilgrim. You just sit, and you can feel the holiness. You stand at the presence of the place where Clare of Assisi died, and you can feel her presence there. It's holy. You see people. I saw this with a group of young people coming into where Francis was buried, and here are these kind of totally narcissistic Italian teenagers, that are looking in their mirrors all the time. And when they get down in that basement, something happens. All of a sudden, there's a twist. And I've seen them, even not prepared religiously, just break down in tears, because I think they just opened up to being surprised by the power of God. Now, those of you that were raised Catholic at a particular time, that in your parish church, most likely, were the favorite saints of whoever the pastor was that built the church, or the religious, the cultural, group. If you're Irish, you had St. Patrick's, and if you were French Canadian, you had St. Anne. If depending on what your culture was. But as a kid, I remember, and in those days they had all the little candles right in front of each one, burning. They were kind of my spiritual friends. You had the friends outside in the schoolyard, but when you went into the church, these people were real. These were not like statues. They were manifestations of lives that somehow still touch us. And then if you see somebody lighting a candle there, it's not only asking a favor, but creating a connection, And when I went to Assisi, people said to me, "Would you light a candle at the site? You know, to be a connection with that place." Jung said that the Mass. He wrote a whole essay on this as the preeminent transformational ritual of Western culture. That the Mass itself it begins with confronting the shadow. You name your sin. You move into going into the wisdom of the tradition and the readings. You have the offering and the sacrifice of the elements, and then you have the going forth to transform the world. So he felt that the Mass is the most important ritual for transformation, because it's not linear, it's not rational, it's not world orientated. It's about creating a space for God. Now, some of the creative intuition about the afterlife that comes through this, kind of uniquely Catholic image. The artist. Now, we have to understand also that all religious traditions have some kind of relationship to saints. Hindus have saints, Buddhists have saints. There's a tradition among all religious traditions that there are prophets and saints and holy men and women who exemplified God's presence on earth. And through them, people had an encounter with God. Okay. So the artistic expression of the heavenly realm. Okay. And what you see is some modern examples of it. I think it's in the Vatican Square. There's an artist that gave a statue of Christ, the homeless person. He's on a bench, and Christ is laying on the bench as a homeless person, right?
Yeah, you don't think it's in Vatican Square, but it's in Rome.
It's in Rome someplace, right? And it is a very remarkable thing, because I think what it reminds us is what you do to the least, you do to me. That is a scriptural mandate, And Mother Teresa used to say, this person is in his or her distressful disguise. You don't hear Christ right now, but somewhere in there, what you do to the least is you do to Christ. So there are devotional prayers, okay? I have a friend of mine who's very funny. Again, another Italian. His mother has a whole list of little novenas that she has, okay? Now, when she goes into the cellar, it means don't bother her. She's doing her novenas. She goes to the cellar and she sits there and she has her novena. And when a person has one of these old books and it's all worn out, these novenas have been a part of her life forever, okay? I'm sure from Sicily, the boat, all the way to America, and raising her family. But these are her companions. I think we can look at it as magical, but these are her companions that she can speak to about her needs and her joys and her sorrows. Because, there are certain saints that are dedicated to certain issues, right? And St. Jude, for the impossible cases, why is it that, Danny Thomas chose St. Jude as the topic for his hospital, right? For cancer survivors, for children. So St. Jude, okay. So there's a devotion between believers and the other side. In the midst of today, this woman with all of her little things in the basement, she's making contact with God. Okay. It's an intercessor of intentions. There are rituals of culture which are timeless. What I mean by that is the timeless rituals in pilgrimage places, you oftentimes have water, streams, sacred water, water that you bring back home. You know, when you go to Lourdes, you bring water back home, you know, as a sign. These are, you know, universal archetypal rituals that are timeless, traditional places of pilgrimage. And some of these pilgrimage places, you know, I don't know how God works, but God always seems to choose very difficult places to get to. You know, it's like, it's not easy to get to some of these places. You really have to effort. When I went to Iona, it was like, where is this place? We left this island and got on this ship. Okay, we're going out into the ocean. We're going out in the ocean. It's like, where is Iona? We get to the end. There's one more ferry to get to the island, which is about as big as this property here. But it's like some of these saints went to the outer edges, away from people to encounter God. Subiaco, you know, I mean, up in the mountains, you know, where he had his breakthrough in the cave, where he began the whole Benedictine tradition. When you go there, my God, you got to go up and up, and finally you got to walk up, and there's this cave, and it's like Christian history was changed 1,500 years ago because of one religious experience through one man that changed the whole Christian world. I mean, that to me is a manifestation of God. You're not worshiping Benedict. You are worshiping the God that created a Benedict to be able to hand on this tradition, so that here we are in South Carolina in 2022, and we're still living in that, you know, the reading from the rule. You know, when you're sitting there and the rule is read, that's 1,500 years ago. Like, so living relationships and friendships between here and eternity, identifications of charism of communities, right? Almost every religious community has some saint attached to it, because this is how God seems to work. God will manifest what we call a charism through a person. The charism is a gift of the Holy Spirit, okay? Given to a concrete man or woman who manifested in their life this gift, okay? And what happens is the gift is meant to be shared. It's not meant to be hoarded. So when someone talks about Franciscan charism or Marist charism or Benedictine charism, or the Saint Vincent de Paul, you know, as soon as you say Saint Vincent de Paul, you think of Saint Vincent de Paul Society, who takes care of the poor and is one of the biggest charities in the world. Okay, started with, you know, two people, a man and a woman, who began this vision of charity. So religious communities, parishes, prayer centers, retreat houses, all based upon these charisms. This is St. Francis Retreat House, based upon that charism. And when you have a charism, you have a manifestation of that charism, like in a sculpture. The art reflects the place. And, you know, in large Catholic cities that were immigrant cities, when I moved to Chicago and I asked where somebody lived, they didn't tell me the street, they told me the parish.
Right.
Oh, I live in St. Cecilia's. Well, they don't give you the direction to the place. They say that's the geography, which when you said what the parish was, it told you your culture, the language, you know, where you came from, where your grandparents came from, You know, it was a complete identification. And many of the charisms are service to the poor and to the marginalized. St. Anthony's Kitchen in San Francisco, you know, is renowned for its charitable works in the Tenderloin, you know, by the tens of thousands of meals given every week in the Tenderloin from that. So in these places, we also go to a place. Now, why would I go from New York City to Glasgow, from Glasgow to, you know, the first place, and then 3 islands? Like, can I pray in New York? You know, is God any more close in New York than he is in Iona? But what's the purpose? The purpose is to resonate with a thin place where it has been prayed over for 1,000 years. And a thin place means I put myself in the position. Now, when I was at Iona, we went to every evening, there's a healing service in the old church. And it's run by the Iona community. But there's a small church in front of it that dates back to about 700 AD. Okay. And one night we were walking back and they were having a Taizé service in the church. So it was amazing to me that as we walked by and people were praying in this Taizé form, a relatively modern manifestation of monasticism that was in that church, right? Like 1,200 years of praying and presence. And you say to yourself, you know, the history of, and I was just thinking of, like, you know, imagining, you know, century after century, how people looked going into that, you know, what they wore, you know, it's like, on the other end of the spectrum, I remember going to a bar in Dublin that has been open for 1,200 years. And, you know, if you were like more than 4 feet 8, you could hardly get in because people were small then. But I'm saying, I'm imagining the murders that took place here, and the conniving in, you know, revolutions, and the crusaders coming in for a drink. It's like, when you go to those places, it opens up your imagination, right? This is the imagination. The imagination opens us up. And a lot of our Christian and Catholic tradition has a lot to do with mythology, creating myths around individuals. You know, and these myths may or may not be real in the, you know, general sense of it, but it is real to our understanding of, you know, who we are. So let me give you an example of 2 myths dealing with evil, or, you know, one of the most common pictures is St. George and the Dragon. This is very big in England because that's of St. George and the King George and all that kind of stuff. Well, the image there is George is sitting on his horse with a long pole, right? And he's attempting to kill the dragon that's on the ground. Now, I learned a whole other mythology a few years ago. I thought, you know, this was it. But there's the myth of St. Martha. I don't know if you're familiar with St. Martha's myth. Okay. You know, there was this whole mythology that was created that people from the Holy Land all moved to France after Jesus disappeared. And you have, like, St. Martha moved to France. Okay, so whether she did or not, I don't know. But the myth is this: there was a village tormented by this evil creature, okay, and this dragon that lived in a cave, and people in the village were afraid of it. Martha was similar to Francis. She went into the cave and tamed the dragon, okay? She didn't kill the dragon. She tamed the dragon. She took off the belt of her dress and put the belt around the dragon and brought the dragon out into the light from instead of hiding in the cave. So these mythologies have different ways of expressing how we relate to these spiritual principles. Do we try and kill it, or do we try and tame it? Do we kill the wolf or feed the wolf so that the wolf doesn't kill us? So these are all different myths and different ways of, and I found this out by giving a retreat at the Sisters of St. Martha in Antigonish, Nova Scotia. Beautiful, beautiful town. Very, very Scottish. There's a university there, University of Antigonish. And they have all these Scottish festivals and everything. But the statue of St. Martha, which I had never seen, is Martha is there, you know, with the dragon on her leash, but she also has huge feet, you know, like a size 16, you know, like almost like clown feet, you know, like when you see these big clown feet, and she's standing there with these feet. And the symbol of it is that Martha is grounded to the earth. She's the practitioner. She's the grounded one. She's the balance from Mary. Mary is the visionary and the contemplative, but Martha is the grounded one who takes care of earthly things and earthly needs. And she doesn't destroy the evil, she transforms the evil. She makes it more available. That energy is no longer locked up in the cave. It can be brought out and transformed. So we learn a lot from these mythologies, and there are a lot of ways in which we recognize this. Now, I know some people have said that, you know, in the middle they have to leave. So we're going to take maybe a 5-minute stand-up break, and we'll come back at 3:15 to give people an opportunity to readjust here. And then we'll come back with the Zoom at 3:15. Okay, we'll take a break. Okay. So we say to ourselves, you know, how does this get translated into our present experience? Because some of this is the experience of another time, but I think this present time still offers a lot of the same qualities. Some of the ancient have been rediscovered. I cannot tell you the number of people, and surprisingly who they are, that have done the El Camino. And it is like more than ever, the El Camino Real is, did you do it?
I did, yeah, it's wonderful.
That's right. Okay, so the El Camino has been, that's one of those that has been rediscovered. When you go to Taizé, which I did a few years ago, the day that we were there were 6,000 young people from around the world studying scripture and praying and being a part of the Taizé community. You know, right next door is an ancient monastic site that is now gone. Cluny, one of the most important monastic sites. And then you've got Taizé on the hill right next door. So you have these ancient and rebirthing places all over the place. So these are archetypal. They're not going to go away. They may be rediscovered, new ones may exist, but pilgrimages are an archetype. If you look at the Muslim religion, right, the pilgrimages, if you go to the Buddhist, you know, the pilgrimages, the sacred places, the Buddhas. So this is part of our nature. It's not going to go away because it's the way in which humans connect with the divine. And we have to translate it in our, now, these thin places, and we were discussing this at the break, so much of it has to do with a place like here at Mepkin, you have it is a thin place because of the beauty of the environment, its history, much of it very dark, because they had probably 200 years of slavery here, along with 75 years of praying by the monks. There's a unique chemistry of light and dark and thinness. My first time that I came here, I felt the thin place of all the souls of those slaves that have died here for centuries. I could feel their presence, and I can also feel the presence of, redemptive love. And I think the fact that it's being preserved, in this way is a gift to all of us to make it a sacred place. Now, Evelyn Underhill, the famous Anglican woman who wrote 3 major texts on mysticism, she defined contemplation or mysticism as the art of union with reality. Is the art of union with reality. But what I want to intimate here is reality is not just what we see here. Beyond the thin place, there's another reality. And the mystic is not only involved with the real here, but is involved with the whole picture of reality, from not only the beginning of life to the end of life here in God's presence, but through the thin place and experiencing the numinous in the present. So God is not far. What the contemplative or the mystic is saying, that in their instinct for God, they have found God in their own place. It's a strong recognition of God in place. It's not ego determined. There's a way in which, if you are called to the contemplative or the mystical, you must befriend the unknown and the unknowable. So this is one of the things that I find in the contemplative program that we've run over the years. The contemplative program is not a clarification. It's rather a deepening of not knowing. There's a befriending, that there's a mystery that we live from, and that there's a mystery beyond us. And that the labels that we have put on ourselves and our reality are way too small. And I use Jung's example here. He said the greatest problem in humanity is we walk in shoes too small. So if we think that what I see and what I own is reality, those shoes are way too small to be living out a full human life. So the instinct for the holy is really not ascent, but descent. Remember we used the quote from Jung about descending, into those stairs. Well, the communion, and here's the paradox of what it means to be a mystic. The mystic has befriended their human reality in order to open up to the divine reality. And as we have to see our own mortality, our own limitations, that opens us up to the more. It's not in seeking experiences that take me out of my reality. It's actually a more profound embrace of my mortality and my reality that opens up to the mystery. So this whole idea of self-judgment, self-knowledge is a lifelong process. We will never finish coming to know who we are. I notice in spiritual direction, there's a temptation for people to say, when am I going to get it? I've been at this for all these years. When am I going to get it? because their image is, I get it, and then I live on cruise control till the end. You know what? I got it now. Okay. What the contemplative life is, recognizing you will never get it if it means a solid understanding of and grasp of who you are, because you're a living mystery. So it's all about getting away from our obsessive thinking, and realizing that, remember we said the paradox of this weekend is finite and infinite, roundedness and eternal, angelic and demonic. There's a light side and dark side to us. There's a beginning piece and there's an ending piece. The ego does not like the idea that it's not in control. It'll do anything to try and hold on to control. To hold on to control creates a personal suffering and agony for others. Holding on to control is causing you suffering, because with that suffering comes anxiety, fear, and distrust of the process. It causes suffering. When you're not in control and you know that you're not in control and you give up, the illusion that you have everything in control, that's when you actually begin to enjoy life. That's when the moment becomes more powerful. Otherwise, you spent most of your life worrying about what probably is not going to happen. This sounds scandalous, but I think William James, the varieties of religious experience, he says that the mystic or the contemplative is he or she that has intercourse with the perfect partner. William James says that contemplation is intercourse with the perfect partner. This form of intercourse is never ending and creates a synthesis of all beauty, form, sufferings, joys, and rapture. This is the search for the infinite and the eternal through a finite creature. I think we have underestimated, and I think because of our Jansenistic heritage, have forgotten that the main vehicle, the main sacrament of God is each other. Why is marriage a sacrament? Because it is viewed that the two who marry each other, it's not the priest is just the witness, that the couple marrying each other have agreed that each other is sacrament for each other, and that you will only be one and complete with the other. You can't do it alone. In the best way, human relationships can invite us into the infinite. Now and I see this with some of my directees. They have a hard time adjusting to the fact that other humans are catalysts for the infinite. They resist this because what we see in humans is a very finite creature, right? We see, they've got their hang-ups, they've got their issues, all that kind of stuff. And we say, how can this be? However, the infinite hides within the finite. And if you truly experience the other as other, then it opens up to the otherness of God. Other moves to other, which moves to the otherness of God. Except the ultimate act of intercourse with the perfect partner is our union with God. The other thing that we want to see about saints and their relationship to us is the saints, many of them, most of them, were not just hidden in cloisters. They were in the streets, and some of them, what I love about the church is the church will be part of the martyrdom of a person and then 100 years later canonize them. We have this history of torturing people and then in hindsight looking back saying, oh, they were really the saints. And I just find it ironic, right, that this is what seems to happen. But some of the saints were pivotal people in the lives of politics and power and had great sway over societies. If you read the life of Catherine of Siena, you realize that through her voice and the authority of her voice coming from her experiences of God, she was able to move the Pope from France back to Rome that nobody else, including armies, could do. Real life holds creative energy for the transformation not only of my personal life, but for some aspect of the world. The challenge, I think, in this is the world has so much darkness. Who are the men and women that are called to bring forth light at this time? Or movements or communities to bring light at this time? The darker the moment, the more piercing the light has potential. Escape from the world is never holy. An escape from the world, because it deals with reality, right, is never holy. I used to find that when I used to go to this contemplative community of nuns that was nearby us, when I was novice director, I used to find out what happened in the world through their prayers of intentions. Like I was out to lunch, I wouldn't know it, and they would be praying for this intention and that intention, because their prayer is in direct relationship to what's happening in the world. Their intention is the concrete expression of the reality of this world. There are people who try and get involved with contemplation and prayer in a spiritual bypass way, avoiding life, finding God and avoiding life. That is not the real God. Spiritual bypassing is that we want to have premature transcendence to go beyond the messy, raw, dirty humanness that we all have to deal with. We use spirituality sometimes to suppress our emotions, repress our bodies, rise above emotions and problems, and we don't want to face reality, so we escape. Premature transcendence is one of the things that I have noticed in my working with people in mentoring. When a person is young and really involved in spirituality, there's always an element there, like, this will save me from the dark, hard, plodding through ordinary life. And that's not real spirituality. Real spirituality is the energy and power to go forward, to integrate what I have done with our lives. We're caught in a difficult time in our history. Secular culture denies mortality and is not interested in immortality at all. Filled with illusions and materialism. And organized religion is decreasing every year from the last 30 years. And there's a missing gap there. How do we, deal with our spiritual needs in the 21st century by inviting people into the spiritual journey, the universal journey that includes not only a deep, powerful interior life, but a committed life to the outer world? That when we leave this world, the world is a better place, that we've contributed something. There's some of you may have heard Edith Piaf in your history, the French singer. And I mentioned her the other day about Saint Therese. She wrote a song towards the end of her life, which is, I love to listen to. Je ne regrette rien. I don't regret anything. And, I think we should write our own verses to that, no matter what it is. And she says, I don't, my troubles, my pleasures, my affairs, the lovers are all swept away. But, I don't regret a thing. And I want to end with a story and a poem. So 3 things. The story is, we had a brother on our property, a real character, Brother Adolf. And Adolf has spent most of his life as a missionary in Indonesia and the islands and so forth. Tough character, The end of his life, you could count the number of teeth in his mouth, like he had gone through hell and back. And I was the director of the brothers at the time on the property, and he had cancer, and I was in contact with the doctor that he was working with. And the doctor called me and he said, "Look, brother, it has spread. He has a very short period of time. We're going to end all kinds of, the chemotherapy and everything. I think it's better for you to sit with him and to start making plans for what's going to happen." So, that's not an easy thing to do with somebody. And I was not in the mood, it's like, I have no idea what he's going to react, And when I say that he has to move from this community because we had to find hospice for him, because the doctor said, don't wait, get him in hospice. So I called the provincial, we're making all the details and stuff. So I go into his room. I tell him the story. And he looks at me right in the face. And it was Edith Piaf. He said, "I have no regrets. I had a great life. I would do it exactly the same way. I'm full of gratitude and I'm ready to go." I was shocked by his very matter of fact. But it was the fact that he really had loved his life that really touched me, and that he had no regrets. Some of you may remember the movie Babette's Feast. And you remember there's a general there, and he's reminiscing about choices and about what happened. And he was attracted to one of the women there that remained to serve the poor. And he had a speech. Remember when they were afraid of eating because they might have pleasure, and he can't believe that people are not excited about this. And the more wine there was, they finally loosened up to enjoy the thing. This is his. I sought out and found the speech that he gave, and I think the speech that he gives talks about mortality and immortality. He says, "Mercy and truth have met together. Righteousness and bliss shall kiss each other. Man in his weaknesses and short-sightedness believes he must make choices in this life. He trembles at the risk he takes. We do know fear, but no, at some juncture our choice is not important. There comes a time when your eyes are opened and we come to realize that mercy is infinite. We need only await it with confidence and receive it with gratitude. Mercy imposes no conditions, and lo, everything we have chosen has been granted to us. And everything we have rejected has also been granted. For mercy and truth are met together, and righteousness and bliss shall kiss each other. This is all shall be well, all manner of things shall be well. And lastly, in your packet, the last page, is a poem that Thomas Keating wrote near his death. And it's called Twilight of the Self. And maybe as our closing prayer, we can, all of us, kind of read it together that are in the room. Let's say it together. My heart is solitary now. It finds no companionship anywhere, and no wish to find any. My sole desire is you, and you are always absent. Can one love absence so intensely that even your presence seems like an intrusion? I move around in aimless circles, rituals and sacred symbols, once treasured sources of relating to you, are meaningless to me now. They communicate nothing of you, who are everything to me, but for whom and from whom I feel no love, nor hope of fulfillment. I am as one turned inside out, and there is nothing there, not you and not me. If this is union, there is neither two in one, nor one without the other. I long to relate to everyone, yet lack the capacity to relate to anyone. There is only your boundless presence that treats me like a thing without a heart, except perhaps a broken heart. But the God I thought I knew no longer exists. Okay. 15 minutes. Any comments or questions on this last segment? Either from in person or on Zoom.
About 15 years ago, there was a film, there was a foundation in Canada that was interested in the ghetto children of
Oh, yeah.
It was called Born to the Brothels. And the woman, photographer, received the grant, and I think the number 20 is there. Mostly they were little girls and a couple little boys. And she wanted to be able to bring them to Canada to study, but to release them from the life of prostitution. Anyway, nobody would have anything to do with it until she bought, out of her own money, a camera for everybody and paid for the films and all of that stuff. They were brought to, I think they won a Nobel Prize or something, but the mothers were not, except for two, a girl and a boy, would not be able to go on to study. But the beauty they found in the brothels, you know, the one flower, I mean, I haven't been to brothels, but I've been to Calcutta, and where they found such beauty, you know, and it was really, and yet she said at the end, it's told her already by the time she went back over to prostitution. The fact that they had the eyes and the wherewithal to show the world,
Yeah.
Cinematography can be very powerful.
Yeah, that's why, like I said, as a spiritual director, I might suggest a film rather than a book, or I might suggest a novel rather than a spiritual reading book, depending on what they need, because my sense of it is people live with very cautious images for themselves of how God works. And we are scandalized by God. God's not scandalized by us. That's the real issue. We are scandalized by God's infinite mercy. We don't understand it. But, we limit where God can be. And I think this has always been one of our problems. I mean, this was the problem that the Pharisees and Sadducees this week has with Jesus. They couldn't imagine that God could be so ordinary and wrapped in such ordinariness. So, we're always scandalized by that.
We have a guest that asked what the name of the film that you just mentioned was.
Babette's Feast?
Yep.
Which is a wonderful story of people coming back to life through food, of course, which is wonderful for me. Say that again. I believe that people on the other side can communicate with us, and that they regularly do. And this is what we did on the workshop, like through dreams and active imagination and synchronistic events. I think what I was trying to determine this weekend is, can you pay attention to all the signs? And if you put all the signs together, they create a picture. And once you have the picture, then you have the solidarity of trust that there is something. They're not dogmatic statements. They're little signs all the time that someone or something is gnawing at us. And I have found that since I'm more attuned to the signs like that, I am less anxious, because I just feel like we're being held in a much bigger container than what we think it is.
So I have actually a couple of questions about
Sure.
the poem that you read.
Yes.
The first person, asked for help in understanding it a little bit because it is painful. And then also a guest says, could you talk a little about Father Keating's poem, when he composed it, and maybe your thoughts on his last thoughts of God, please?
Yes, I think what happens is, this is one of his last poems, and having been through this radical detachment and radical letting go. I mean, after a long, long life of letting go, you don't have anything left except the experience of the absence of God, which is paradoxically the presence of God. This is again paradoxical. He's not talking about like there is no God. What he's talking about is, I have no more feeling about God, but all I have is the absence, a recognition of God's presence. And all the things that were meaningful at one point, about the spiritual journey, none of them have meaning anymore, because when you're at that cusp, okay, those were the aids for this side of the world. This poem is really in the liminal state between the two worlds, to me, where the thought of God no longer exists, only the reality of God exists.
I think it's likely said described as the lack of the experience of God is the experience of God.
That's right. The lack of experience of God is the experience of God. And the profound ache of the absence of God is the presence of God. This is the paradoxical place.
It's more about uncertainty.
That's right. And it's about the God that has now initiated you in total unknowing. So all the things that you knew and held secure, they're all passing because they're not going to be helps on the way on the other side. All you have left is your essence. Everything else is gone.
Is that some of what poetry is?
Yeah, exactly.
Life as far as
The Dark Knight.
dark.
Yeah. There was, I think it's like the way that in a very simplistic way, the way that I see it, okay, and I'm certainly not there, but it's like when you look at something really close, you can't see it. Right? You can't read it if it's really close. When God is so close in the experience of a person, there's no differentiation between yourself and God. So it feels absent, like where is God? But everybody's seeing God in her. So it's like the more she exudes God, the more she doesn't get that God is there, because God is not out there. And if you read her letters, and it was very poignant, where she would say, here she is, esteemed and all this kind of stuff. And the novices, like these young girls, 25 years old, are having ecstatic, beautiful experiences of God. And she's sitting there saying, am I a hypocrite? Am I dead? What's going on? I don't have any feelings about God. And all the women that are joining her, in their enthusiasm are just oozing God. Well, that's because she and God were no longer separate. And God had kind of incarnated in her. So there is no external God to pray to. It's like, how do you pray to God that's in your flesh? You can't do it. All you can do is be. You can only be. And her faith, of course, brought her through it. Yes.
Thomas Burton had an image once that helped me very, very much. I was quite young. I tried to read John Cross. It didn't work. But one of his writings, he said that most of us would understand this. Someone takes a picture of you with a flash. Remember how it was with the light? You could see the brightness. He said, the dark night of the soul is when the light of Christ breaks into your life. So great, you can see it. That's what I am thinking of when I read this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and there's a lot of psychological jargon going on about dark night of the soul that is misunderstood in terms of the tradition. There's dark night of the soul, which I believe most psychologists are talking about the dark night of the ego. Okay, that's the purification part and the suffering part. The dark night of the soul, which Keating is talking about here, is the encounter of his essence with God. And that's not because there's a blockage. It's because he's so close to God. The suffering is that way. So, I always differentiate between the dark night of the ego, which the majority of us go through at some point in life. But the dark night of the soul, this essential thing, is something that is much rarer. But I think we go through in the transition to God. I think that's part of the life review and things that we talked about. We all go through it. Few go through it, I think, existentially here and live it in a very concrete way. Because if you listen to people in society, oh, I'm in the dark night. No, you're not in the dark night. You're in a dark night and you are dark. But this is not the dark night of the soul. Because the dark night of the soul has to do with the intense intimacy of the soul with God. And most people who identify the dark night of the soul is the purification of letting go of their narcissistic self-absorption to be able to be in relationship with God. Two different things.
So just one quick one for you, actually, the story that you mentioned, we had guests say they couldn't hear everything you said. Where was that story from? What, that you were sharing? The movie.
It's called The Born to the Brothels.
Okay. The what?
Brothel.
Brothels.
Brothels. Houses of prostitution.
And then, thank you. And then the last one is, does leaning into the longing for God seem like a valid path when we can't see the signs?
Absolutely, because there's nothing else you can do. You lean into what you trust. And you don't make choices as much as an orientation. The choices are the things that set the orientation. No, I'm leaving tomorrow morning, first thing. Okay, thank you very much, and peace to everybody. Okay, that's good.